Welcome to Veiled Narrative Stories, where every tale unveils the unseen depths of the human heart. Today's story reminds us that love and wisdom often wear the simplest clothes, while arrogance wears the loudest suit. So sit back, open your heart, and listen closely, because sometimes, the person we underestimate most becomes the one who changes everything. Ethan Cole was the kind of man who believed success had a smell: expensive cologne, polished shoes, and freshly printed contracts. At 35, he was one of the city's most powerful lawyers, sharp, ambitious, feared in court, but beneath the tailored suits and arrogance he was lonely. Not that he'd ever admit it. Every evening, when the law firm emptied, a quiet figure entered: Isabella, the cleaning lady. She spoke little English, her accent thick and musical. She'd hum softly as she worked, her presence almost invisible. Until one night, she wasn't invisible anymore. There are moments in life when power meets grace, when pride collides with something so gentle, so unassuming, that it disarms the very arrogance it confronts. For Ethan Cole, that moment arrived one rain-soaked evening inside his glass-walled office overlooking the glittering skyline of New York City. The storm outside mirrored the storm within him. Deadlines, deals, and endless cases. That was his world. Everything about him screamed success: the Italian suit hugging his frame, the Rolex that gleamed under the soft amber light, the expensive fragrance that lingered in the air long after he'd left the room. To the world, Ethan Cole was the definition of excellence. But inside, he was a man intoxicated by his own reflection, admired, yet achingly alone. As the office emptied, silence filled the marble floors. That's when she entered, quietly, almost like a whisper that the universe sent to humble a man who had forgotten the language of kindness. Her name was Isabella. She wore a simple uniform, hair tied in a loose bun, her movements graceful, unhurried. The click of her cleaning cart echoed faintly against the walls of glass and power. To Ethan she was invisible, part of the background noise that kept his empire spotless. Until that night, he was reviewing a file from a new Italian client, a case worth millions. The words on the paper blurred together in frustration. He was tired, impatient, irritable. When Isabella accidentally brushed against the edge of his desk, sending a few papers tumbling, the temper that had been simmering all day erupted. "Can't you be careful? Do you even understand what these are? Or is English too much for you?" His voice sliced through the room, sharp, cold, arrogant. Isabella froze. For a second the rain's rhythm seemed to stop. Her dark eyes lifted, meeting his, not with anger, not with submission, but with something far stronger: quiet dignity. She knelt down, picking up each page delicately, her fingers tracing the ink with a familiarity that startled him. Then, softly, she said, "This document, you've translated this clause incorrectly." Ethan blinked, his arrogance faltering. "Excuse me." She turned the page around and pointed to a section written in Italian. Her voice was calm, precise. "This phrase, diritti esclusivi, doesn't mean shared rights, Mr. Cole. It means exclusive rights. You're about to sign away your client's ownership." The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan stared, disbelief slowly giving way to realization. She wasn't guessing. She was reading, fluently, elegantly, like someone who had lived inside the language all her life. "You speak Italian?" he asked, his tone softer now, almost cautious. "Among others," she replied gently, her eyes lowering again. "I studied linguistics in Rome once, before life took me somewhere else." Something shifted inside him. In that moment, his arrogance, polished, professional, untouchable, cracked. The woman he had mocked, the one he thought beneath him, had just saved his reputation, his firm, and perhaps even his pride. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't know what to say. The man who commanded juries and judges, who could talk anyone into silence, stood there, speechless. She finished gathering the papers and placed them neatly on his desk. "You should rest, Mr. Cole," she said kindly, her accent smooth, melodic. "Even the smartest minds make mistakes when they are tired." Then she turned and walked away, her footsteps soft, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than gold. That night, Ethan couldn't focus. He poured himself a drink, staring at the city lights through his floor-to-ceiling windows. Each drop of rain sliding down the glass felt like a quiet reminder that perhaps brilliance wasn't measured in wealth or power, but in humility and grace. He remembered the steadiness in Isabella's eyes. There was no resentment there, no bitterness, only a calm intelligence that needed no validation. He thought about her hands, the same hands that polished desks and wiped glass, revealing the very error his mind had missed. How many times had he walked past her without seeing her humanity, without realizing that behind her silence was a story far richer than any contract he had ever drafted? The next morning, Ethan came to the office earlier than usual. He waited, almost nervously, for her to arrive. When she did, she looked surprised to see him standing by her cleaning cart. "Good morning, Isabella," he said, his voice measured, humble. "Good morning, Mr. Cole. About last night?" He hesitated. "I was wrong. I shouldn't have spoken to you that way." She gave a small smile, one of those rare, gentle smiles that seem to forgive the world without words. "It's all right," she replied. "You were tired." But he knew it wasn't all right, not because of the mistake, but because of what it revealed about him. And in that moment he made a silent promise he would never look at her, or anyone, the same way again. From that night forward, Ethan found himself watching Isabella not out of curiosity but admiration. Her quiet strength fascinated him, her humility humbled him. He began to realize something profound. That true greatness doesn't announce itself, it whispers through patience, kindness, and grace. And without either of them realizing it yet, something began to bloom. A delicate, slow, burning connection between two souls from different worlds, one built from arrogance, the other from humility, now intertwined by the most unexpected force of all, respect. The following week something inside Ethan Cole had changed, subtly, but unmistakably. His once hurried footsteps now carried hesitation. His usual tone of command had softened into something resembling reflection. The man who once ruled his world with deadlines and documents was, for the first time, distracted, not by a case, but by a woman who had slipped into his mind like a whisper he couldn't ignore. Isabella. He found himself noticing details he had once been blind to. The way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear while working, the quiet hum of Italian songs that seemed to fill the cold, modern office with warmth, the gentle rhythm of her presence. The storm that had once raged in his heart had found its calm in her silence. And yet, something about her didn't fit. She wasn't just a cleaning lady. There was poise in her movements, precision in her words, and an intelligence that glimmered quietly behind her soft gaze. It was the kind of brilliance that didn't need to shine, it simply was. One evening he asked her to stay for a moment. "Isabella," he began, his tone careful, almost nervous, "that night when you translated the contract you said you studied linguistics in Rome." She nodded, slightly surprised he remembered. "Yes, I studied at Sapienza University. Italian, English, and Latin. I wanted to become a translator for international courts." Ethan blinked. "That's one of the best universities in Europe," he said, his voice softening. "What are you doing here cleaning offices?" A shadow crossed her face, delicate as a passing cloud. She looked out the window before replying. "Life doesn't always ask what we want, Mr. Cole. Sometimes it simply takes and leaves us to rebuild quietly." There was no bitterness in her tone, only acceptance, the kind that comes from surviving pain. "After my husband died," she continued, "I couldn't stay in Italy. Every street, every cafe reminded me of him. So I came here. The language was familiar, the silence even more so. I needed work, any work, and this was what I found." Ethan felt something stir deep inside, guilt, admiration, and a strange kind of ache. He had spent years chasing power, convincing himself that prestige defined a person's worth. Yet, here she was, a woman who had once studied languages, now scrubbing glass walls for people who didn't even look at her. And somehow, she radiated more dignity than anyone he had ever met in a courtroom. "You could have been anything," he whispered. She smiled gently. "We can still be everything we are, even when no one notices." That night, he couldn't sleep. The image of her lingered in his mind like a haunting melody, graceful, calm, and impossibly strong. He found himself searching her name online, trying to piece together fragments of her past. And there it was, an old article from an Italian university journal. Isabella Romano, the woman who speaks in 7 tongues. It detailed her thesis on ancient languages, her passion for preserving dying dialects, her brilliance in cross-cultural translation. 7 languages. 7 worlds she could step into effortlessly, while he had mocked her for speaking broken English. He leaned back in his chair, the irony striking like thunder. He, the man of law and words, had failed to understand the very essence of them, respect. The next morning, he arrived early again. She was already there, wiping down the conference table, the sunrise glinting against the city skyline. "Isabella," he said softly, placing a cup of cappuccino on the desk. Italian style, extra foam. She blinked, surprised, then smiled. You remembered. I read about you last night, he admitted, eyes lowering slightly. Your thesis, your work, you were remarkable. A blush rose to her cheeks, gentle as dawn. That was a long time ago, Mr. Cole. Ethan, he corrected. Just Ethan. She hesitated, then nodded. All right, Ethan. The way she said his name, soft, unhurried, made it sound almost sacred. You know, he continued, I've worked with people from every corner of the world, and yet I've never met someone who understands communication the way you do. Because language is not about words, she said, her eyes meeting his. It's about listening. Truly listening. Most people only wait for their turn to speak. Her words sank into him like sunlight melting through frost. Over the next few weeks, Ethan began inviting her to help with translation for the firm's international clients. At first she hesitated, shy, unsure, but soon her confidence began to bloom again. Watching her work was like watching art in motion. Her voice flowing between languages, her eyes bright alive. The staff were astonished. Ethan was captivated. He realized he had never truly seen a person before, not until her. Isabella's mind was a symphony, her humility the rhythm that held it together. There was a kind of luxury in her simplicity, the rare elegance of someone who didn't need to prove her worth. The more he learned about her, the more he fell. Not in the loud, reckless way he had seen in movies, but in the quiet, reverent way a soul recognizes its mirror. One night, after finishing a late translation session, he turned to her and said, You've changed how I see people, how I see myself. She looked at him surprised. How so? Because I thought intelligence was about achievement, but you've shown me that wisdom lives in kindness, that brilliance can be gentle, that humility is the most powerful language of all. Isabella's eyes softened. And you, Ethan, have shown me that not all powerful men are blind forever. The rain outside whispered against the windows. For a moment the city disappeared, and only they remained. Two souls, once divided by pride and circumstance, now standing in the quiet revelation of understanding. And though neither of them said it, they both knew something beautiful had begun. Change often begins quietly, not with thunder, but with a single heartbeat learning a new rhythm. For Ethan Cole, that rhythm began the moment he stopped seeing Isabella Romano as the woman who cleaned his office, and started seeing her as the mirror of everything he'd forgotten to be. Humble, kind, human. Days turned into weeks, and their conversations became his favorite part of the day. Sometimes they spoke about law, sometimes about language, and sometimes about nothing at all. Just quiet moments between two people who didn't need words to feel understood. But beneath that calm surface, something powerful was unfolding. Ethan was changing, not because he had to, but because she made him want to. One evening, the city glowed under the soft amber of twilight. Ethan's office, usually a fortress of polished glass and strict discipline, felt different, warm, almost alive. Isabella sat across from him, reviewing a translated deposition. Her reading glasses framed her delicate features, and every so often she'd push them up her nose with the grace of someone who didn't even know how effortlessly beautiful she looked. He watched her, pretending to read, but truly memorizing the way light touched her hair, golden threads against the dimming skyline. You're staring again, she said without looking up. He smiled, caught. I was just thinking, this office used to feel empty even when it was full of people. Now it feels alive. She looked up then, her eyes catching his soft but steady. Maybe it's not the office that changed, Ethan. Maybe it's you. That night, after she left, Ethan stayed behind, not to work, but to think. The man he had been, ruthless, proud, untouchable, seemed distant now, almost unrecognizable. For years he'd believed empathy was weakness. He'd built walls of intellect and wealth to protect himself from ever feeling small. But now, in Isabella's presence, he found strength in gentleness and power in compassion. He remembered the way she had listened to everyone, the interns, the janitors, even the security guard, as though every person mattered. She didn't just hear people, she felt them. And somehow, she made him want to do the same. He began greeting his staff with warmth. He asked about their families. He learned their names. All of them. And though no one said it aloud, they all noticed the difference. The cold lawyer who once ruled with logic had begun to lead with heart. A few nights later, Ethan found Isabella in the break room, pouring tea. The lights were dim, and the city outside shimmered like 1,000 diamonds scattered across velvet. He leaned against the doorway, watching her for a moment. "I didn't know you liked jasmine tea," he said. She smiled softly. "It reminds me of home. Rome has this little street market. Every Sunday, they sell dried jasmine flowers. I used to go there with—" She stopped, her voice catching slightly. "With your husband?" Ethan asked gently. She nodded. He loved the smell, said it made the whole house feel alive. A quiet filled the room, not heavy but tender. Ethan stepped closer, his tone softer now. "He must have been a very lucky man." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "We were both lucky for a while." "Do you still miss him?" "Every day," she said. "But love doesn't disappear when people leave. It changes shape. It becomes the warmth you carry, the patience you learn, the kindness you give." Ethan swallowed hard. Her words struck something deep within. A part of him that had forgotten what love even felt like. "You speak about love like it's an art," he whispered. She looked at him, eyes glistening like moonlit water. "It is, and empathy is the brush that paints it." That night, something in him truly broke open. For years, Ethan had measured life in wins and losses, in cases closed and deals signed. But now he understood. The true victories were invisible. It wasn't the contracts that mattered. It was the people behind them. It wasn't money that gave meaning. It was connection. And it was Isabella who had taught him that, not through grand speeches or demands, but through quiet example. Weeks passed, and their bond deepened. They began having dinner together after work, not in 5-star restaurants, but small Italian cafes tucked into hidden corners of the city. She'd laugh softly when he tried to pronounce the menu in Italian, and he'd pretend to be offended just to hear her laugh again. There was luxury in those moments. Not of wealth but of presence. The luxury of feeling alive with someone who sees you. One evening, as they walked by the riverside, a light drizzle began to fall. Ethan instinctively removed his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. "You'll catch a cold," he said, "and you'll catch one without this," she teased. "Then we'll both be sick," he replied, smiling. "At least together." They both laughed, that gentle, unguarded laughter that comes only when hearts finally trust. The rain fell harder, soaking them, but neither cared. It was the kind of moment you don't plan, you just feel. Under that dusky sky, Ethan realized something profound. Empathy had done what ambition never could. It had healed him. He no longer needed to impress her. He only wanted to understand her, to listen, to care, to give without reason, and in her eyes he no longer saw judgment or distance. He saw recognition. The quiet acceptance of two souls who had walked through pain and somehow found each other in the middle of it. By the time they reached the end of the river path, he took her hand, gently, reverently. "You've changed me, Isabella," he said softly. "I used to think success was about conquering the world, but now I see it's about understanding it." She smiled, her fingers intertwining with his. "And maybe," she whispered, "understanding begins with the heart." The city lights shimmered around them, reflected in the wet streets like constellations of gold. Two people, once strangers divided by pride, now stood beneath the rain, not needing any translation at all, because empathy had become their common language, and love, quiet, patient, timeless, was learning to speak through both of them. Love, when it arrives, rarely announces itself. It doesn't come wrapped in roses or whispered promises. It comes quietly, like a soft light filtering through the cracks of your armor. For Ethan Cole, that light had a name: Isabella Romano. What began as curiosity had become admiration. What began as admiration had turned into something far more dangerous: need. Not the kind of need born from loneliness, but the need to be known. For the first time, the millionaire lawyer, the man who once ruled with intellect and status, found himself stripped of every illusion of control, and he wasn't afraid, because in front of Isabella, he didn't have to perform, he could simply be. Their meetings had become a ritual. Every evening, after the last employee left and the city lights began to bloom across the skyline, Isabella would join him in his office. They would talk, translate, laugh. Sometimes they shared tea, sometimes silence. But it was always enough. One evening, she arrived wearing a simple cream sweater and her hair down, soft waves cascading over her shoulders. Ethan couldn't take his eyes off her. "You look different tonight," he said quietly. "Different?" she asked, smiling. "No uniform, no barriers, just you." She blushed, turning her face slightly away. "I didn't think you'd notice." I notice everything about you now, he whispered. A silence hung between them, charged and tender. Outside, the city was alive. Car lights flashing like distant fireflies, the hum of life moving beneath their suspended world of glass. They began to talk about love that night, not directly, but through the safety of stories. Did you ever fall in love in Rome? Ethan asked, pretending to study the file before him. She chuckled softly. Once. I was 20. He played the violin. I thought music was love until I realized music ends and love doesn't. He smiled faintly. And you, did you ever fall in love? She asked. Ethan leaned back, eyes distant. Once. I thought I did. She loved my success more than my soul. I was too busy proving my worth to notice she didn't love me, just the life that surrounded me. That sounds lonely, Isabella said softly. It was, he admitted, until now. The room fell silent. She looked at him, really looked, and saw something raw in his eyes. It wasn't arrogance anymore, it was truth. Over the following days, their bond deepened in ways neither could explain. Ethan began leaving handwritten notes in Italian on her desk. Il mondo è più bello con te qui. The world is more beautiful with you here. She would find them, smile quietly, and reply with short translations written in neat cursive. Beauty only exists where hearts are seen. There was poetry in their simplicity. Two souls from different worlds finding harmony through words that needed no translation. One Friday evening, Ethan invited her to dinner, not at one of his exclusive clubs, but at a quiet rooftop restaurant overlooking the river. Candles flickered against the cool night air. Soft jazz played in the background. When Isabella arrived, he stood, breath-catching. She wore a black satin dress, elegant but understated, the city lights dancing on her skin. You look, he began, but words failed. Like someone who doesn't belong here, she teased gently. No, he said, stepping closer. Like someone who makes every place she enters belong to her. Her eyes softened, and for a moment, the noise of the world fell away. They talked for hours, about books, dreams, and the lives they'd lived before this unlikely crossing of paths. Ethan shared stories he had never told anyone, his childhood fears, his emptiness behind success. And Isabella, in turn, spoke of loss, of resilience, of learning to begin again. The air between them grew tender, intimate, alive. When the waiter brought dessert, Ethan reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. You know, he said quietly, the first time I saw you, I thought you didn't belong in this world, but now I see. I didn't belong in yours. The world of gentleness, patience, humanity. Isabella looked down, her breath catching. Ethan, you don't have to say that. I do, he insisted, his voice soft but firm. Because you've given me something no one ever has. Peace. Her eyes shimmered, the candlelight reflecting in them like starlight on water. You've given me something too, she whispered. A reason to trust again. As the night deepened, they stepped onto the terrace. The city glowed beneath them, an ocean of light. Ethan stood beside her, the wind tugging gently at her hair. Do you ever think love can exist between two people from completely different worlds? He asked. She turned to him, smiling. Love doesn't ask where you come from. It only asks if you're willing to meet halfway. He reached out, brushing a raindrop from her cheek, though it hadn't begun to rain. I'd meet you anywhere, he said softly. Their eyes met, that slow, suspended moment before the world changes. And then, finally, Ethan leaned in, not in hunger, but in reverence, and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of conquest. It was a promise, quiet, deep, timeless. That night, as they stood beneath the city's glittering skyline, everything that once separated them, money, titles, pain, dissolved. They were no longer the millionaire lawyer and the cleaning lady. They were simply two souls who had found each other in the language of love. A language that needed no translation, no explanation, no permission. Love had risen, unbound by class, untouched by pride, pure, simple, radiant. And in that moment, under the stars that neither wealth nor sorrow could own, Ethan Cole realized, true luxury isn't what you wear, it's what you feel. And he had never felt richer in his entire life. Love, when matured by humility and time, doesn't shout. It doesn't demand recognition or applause. It breathes, quietly, steadily, inside those who've learned to listen. For Ethan Cole, the man who once believed intelligence was power, success and dominance, life had come full circle. He had learned that brilliance without empathy is just arrogance in disguise. And that the greatest education begins not in universities or courtrooms, but in the silent classroom of the heart. Months had passed since that night on the rooftop, that single kiss beneath the infinite city sky. Life had changed, not in loud ways but in profound ones. Ethan's firm had launched the Bridge program, a visionary initiative offering opportunities to multilingual immigrants and underrepresented communities. The man who once mocked a cleaning lady now stood proudly beside her. Isabella Romano, the program's director-translator, and his greatest inspiration. That evening, as they prepared for the program's grand launch gala, Ethan looked at her reflection in the mirror. She wore a white silk dress, simple, pure, her hair pinned elegantly, a single jasmine flower tucked behind her ear. To him, she looked like everything he had ever searched for: peace, purpose, and poetry wrapped in one woman. "You're staring again," she said, smiling at his reflection. "I can't help it," he murmured, stepping closer. "Every time I look at you, I remember who I used to be and who I became because of you." She turned, eyes shimmering. "You became yourself, Ethan. That's all I ever wanted for you to find." Later that night, the ballroom glittered with gold chandeliers and murmurs of admiration. The city's elite had gathered: lawyers, investors, ambassadors. All eyes were on Ethan as he took the stage to deliver his speech. But before he began, he glanced toward Isabella, standing near the back, calm and radiant. Their eyes met, and in that instant, every rehearsed word vanished. He took a breath and spoke, not from his intellect, but from his soul. "I used to believe intelligence was a matter of degrees and success, a scale you could measure in numbers, wealth, and wins. But life taught me differently. It taught me that true intelligence isn't about how many languages you can speak. It's about the compassion you communicate without words. It's not about mastering arguments, but mastering kindness. And it's not found in those who speak loudest, but in those who listen the deepest." The room fell utterly silent. "Once," he continued, his voice softening, "I mocked a woman I thought was beneath me. She was cleaning floors while I stood in my arrogance. But that woman, that extraordinary woman, saw what I could not. She showed me that humility is the highest form of wisdom, and that the heart is the most intelligent organ we possess." He paused, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. "Tonight, I dedicate this program not to intellect but to empathy. Because brilliance without humanity is blindness, and success without love is failure." Applause erupted, thunderous, endless. But Ethan wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking at Isabella, tears glistening in her eyes, her smile soft as the light of dawn. After the ceremony, they escaped the noise, stepping onto the quiet terrace overlooking the city. Below them, the river shimmered like liquid glass. Isabella leaned against the railing, her voice barely above a whisper. "You spoke beautifully, Ethan." "No," he said, taking her hand. "You spoke. Every word I said tonight was something you taught me." She smiled, looking at him. The man who once wore pride like armor, now standing unguarded and free. "You've come a long way," she said. He took a deep breath, the cool night air wrapping around them like silk. "You know, I used to think love was an equation, give and take, perfect balance. But it's not, is it?" "No," she whispered. "It's translation. Two hearts speaking in different languages, trying to understand each other. That's the beauty." He smiled. "The kind of smile that belongs only to those who've been saved by love. Then you're the only translator I'll ever need." He kissed her then, slow, deep, certain, as fireworks erupted over the skyline. Each burst of light painted the night in gold and crimson, reflecting off the glass towers like scattered stars. In that embrace there were no hierarchies, no power, no pretense, only two souls, equal and eternal. The city around them, once a symbol of ambition, now felt small, because the universe between them was vast enough. Months later, in an intimate ceremony attended by close friends and colleagues, Ethan and Isabella married beneath an arch of white jasmine and ivory roses. He wore no tie that day. She insisted on it, and when he looked at her walking down the aisle, he saw not the woman he had once underestimated, but the woman who had taught him how to feel. At the reception, Isabella whispered in his ear, "Do you remember the first thing you said to me?" He laughed softly. "Unfortunately, yes. It was cruel. And yet," she said with a teasing smile, "you've spent every day since translating it into love." He kissed her hand, eyes warm. "And I'll spend the rest of my life perfecting that translation." In the end, their love became more than a romance. It became a lesson. That no title, no degree, no amount of wealth could ever compare to the intelligence of the heart. the ability to see another soul and say, "I understand you." Their story was not about a millionaire and a cleaning lady. It was about two people who discovered that love is the greatest equalizer, a force that dissolves every barrier, humbles every ego, and elevates every spirit it touches. And so, under the soft glow of the city that once separated them, Ethan and Isabella lived, not perfectly, but meaningfully, their home filled with books, laughter, and the scent of jasmine tea. Because, as Isabella once said, love doesn't disappear, it just changes shape. And theirs had become the most beautiful form of all, intelligent, eternal, and true. In the end, what began as an insult became a revelation. Ethan Cole, the man who once believed the world revolved around intellect, wealth, and words, discovered something far greater, that the truest translation in life is not between languages, but between hearts. Isabella didn't just clean the floors of his office, she cleansed the arrogance from his soul. Her grace spoke louder than his degrees. Her silence taught him what eloquence never could. Through her, Ethan learned that love isn't a conquest, it's a classroom, that humility is the highest intelligence, and that sometimes the most fluent people are those who speak softly, in the dialect of kindness, empathy, and truth. They say love changes people, but real love, the kind that challenges and humbles, doesn't just change you, it translates you into a better version of yourself. And that is the story of Ethan and Isabella, a story not of pride and power, but of awakening. Because brilliance fades, beauty fades, but the wisdom of the heart, that remains timeless.